9 miles south of downtown Denver and 55 miles north of Colorado Springs, you'll find the quaint area of Littleton, Colorado. With a population of around 45,000 people, it's a bit of a unique entity to describe. It's known as one of Colorado's 100 towns and cities that have what's referred to as home rule municipalities, which means they are self-governing. Essentially, a state charter gives local municipalities the power to make legislation relevant to their areas, exercising control over issues of local concern, while keeping the state from interfering with municipal affairs. Littleton as a city is in 3 counties: Arapahoe, Douglas, and Jefferson. 11 zip codes claim the Littleton name, so even though they are their own distinct areas, they are synonymous with Littleton, including the unincorporated communities of Acres Green, Carriage Club, Heritage Hills, Highlands Ranch, Roxborough Park, and Columbine. I probably caught your attention with that last name. That's because while people come to Littleton for nature, arts, food, culture, and proximity to Denver, the area is often a reminder of the 1999 Columbine High School massacre. On that day, 2 high school seniors armed with guns, ammunition, homemade bombs, and a detailed plan walked through the halls of Columbine High School and murdered 12 students, 1 teacher, and wounded 24 others. The horror captured attention worldwide and forever changed the landscape of American school safety protocols, law enforcement procedures, and prevention initiatives. The survivors of the Columbine tragedy had to pick up the pieces and attempt to create a new normal for themselves while navigating immense trauma. For 2 of those students, the high school shooting was not the end of the violence they would experience. Just 10 months later, they would be gunned down, layering unfathomable grief to an already shattered community. Their senseless murders are still unsolved, but locals and law enforcement strongly believe that there are people out there who know more than what they are saying. My hope is that in sharing the story, the right people carrying a 24-year-old burden will find it in their hearts to talk. This is A Simpler Time True Crime: The Murders of Nick Kunselman and Stephanie Hart-Grizzell. Stephanie Hart-Grizzell was born October 28, 1983 in Denver, Colorado. I spent time trying to learn as much as I could about her from the information that is out there, and here's what I found. In the year of 2000, where most people still had dial-up internet and popularity around AOL Instant Messenger was raging, Stephanie was already weary of the impact screens were having on society as a whole. Her mother, Kelly, told the Denver Post how Stephanie wanted to go live in the woods and survive on making art and music. She said that her daughter felt the technology was making the world a colder place, where people stared into screens and no longer related to the humans in their presence. She hated TV and loved music. Stephanie's peers said she never really had a specific friendship group, more so just an artistic vibe about herself that she gave off and friends from everywhere. Her love of music may have been what drew her to her guitar-playing boyfriend, Nick Kunselman. Nick was born March 15, 1984, in Loveland, Colorado. He and Stephanie first became fast friends in junior high with some of their shared interests in friendship circle. That friendship blossomed into a romantic bond of young love as they entered high school. As mentioned, Nick loved playing guitar. He also had a huge bond with his family and was described as being very close to them. In 1999, he earned the recognition of the Colorado State Junior Disc Golf Champion. It seemed that whatever Nick set his mind to, he worked hard to be great at it. As the Sweethearts were navigating their freshman year, tragedy struck. Nick was actually playing his guitar at Columbine High School when the shooting began. Nick and Stephanie survived the mass shooting without physical injury, but like most of their community, they were left reeling. Not only did they have to navigate the tangible loss of those who died, they also had to tend to invisible grief, experiencing trauma through a tragedy that had gained worldwide attention. The two had a loss of innocence in how they experienced day-to-day life and saw the world around them. For Stephanie, she had a deep sense of the complexities of the world to begin with. Her mother told the Denver Post that she had been encouraging Stephanie to look towards the future. She recalled telling her daughter, quote, "This is the worst there will be. There won't be any more." Almost prophetically, Stephanie responded to her mom with, "Mom, there will be more." Sunday, February 13th, 2000 was a typical day. Nick was scheduled to work an evening shift at the local Subway shop where he had been working for a month. Located at 6768 West Coal Mine Avenue in Littleton, the sandwich shop was just a few blocks from Columbine High School, making it convenient for Nick to walk after school to his shift. This was essential because Nick didn't have his driver's license yet. I'll share a picture of this map on the Instagram page, @SimplerTimeCrimePod. Nick had made a name for himself as a reliable worker and was given additional shifts and responsibilities, often being left to close the store. Yes, you heard that right. Fully close up the store, including securing the cash from the register, cleaning and closing up, and leaving alone at age 15. Labor laws existed back then as they do now. According to Colorado youth law, minors under 16 can work between the hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. during the school year and on school nights. On school days, they cannot work more than 3 hours, and there is a limit of 8 hours on non-school days, capping at a max of 18 hours total for the week. Laws are laws, but back around this time of the late 90s and early 2000s, I remember plenty of my friends and my sister's friends working jobs that didn't abide by this. Nick probably wasn't even complaining about it. What teen doesn't want to have extra opportunity to make money and have the confidence that comes with this kind of freedom? But as we know, teens don't have fully developed judgment on what is good and safe for them and what isn't, including in the workplace. With youth more protected now, back then may have been a simpler time, but was it safer? The easiest explanation of this heightened exploitation from the time was likely that it was just easier to get away with it back then. With today's digital timestamps and employment reporting mechanisms firmly in place, employers have to be much more cautious and familiar with labor laws due to being at greater risk for being fined. Back then, it was mainly caught when a significant event brought the violations to light. This case was no different. I'm skipping ahead a bit, but I want to note the owner of this Subway was fined $19,000 after the incident for allowing a 15-year-old to work alone at the shop, a violation of federal labor laws. Stephanie had spent a quiet evening at home. Her mother, Kelly, was relaxing, and Stephanie was hanging out in her pajamas working on her algebra homework. As Kelly got ready for bed, she stopped by to wish Stephanie goodnight, thinking her daughter was closely behind her. She told ABC News affiliate Denver 7, quote, "The last thing I told her was, 'Good night, I love you. I'll never forget that,'" end quote. What Kelly didn't know is that Stephanie planned on ducking out after her mom went to bed. She was going to hang out with Nick after closing while he completed his task list. Stephanie would then be able to give Nick a ride home since she had her license, but it's also rumored that the two may have been planning to meet up with some friends after his shift. Friends who grew worried when Nick and Stephanie hadn't arrived. Around 12:40 a.m., an unnamed female coworker of Nick's drove by the Subway and was confused because she still saw the lights on and the shop should have been closed hours ago. Curious but not expecting the worst, she pulled into the parking lot to see what was going on. When she approached the store, she witnessed a person she was unfamiliar with exit the back of the store into the dark. We'll get more into that description in a bit. The doors to the business were open, and when she walked inside, she stumbled into a horrific scene. Behind the counter were Nick and Stephanie, both deceased from gunshot wounds. The employee quickly called 911, and around 12:47 a.m. on Valentine's Day 2000, officers responded to the scene. Kelly Grizzell was unaware that her daughter had left the house that night. When she turned on the news that morning, she had already noticed her daughter's car not in the driveway, which she had found odd. Then, while watching local reporters covering an overnight shooting, she saw her daughter's car at the scene of the crime. Kelly couldn't orient herself to what she was seeing and what that meant. Police and cameras arrived at her house moments later, and through the chaos of all that was unfolding, she vaguely recalls hearing somebody say, quote, "Is this the mother?" and looking next to her for someone else. But they were talking to her. This is how she found out that her beautiful 16-year-old daughter had been senselessly murdered. In that same News 7 interview, she said, quote, "I can remember bits and pieces after that. It was February. I didn't have a coat. I remember falling to the ground," end quote. Police were stunned to find out the victims of this crime were also survivors of the Columbine tragedy. The pain from that was not even remotely in the rear view, and this gave them renewed commitment to solve the case. Sheriff John Stone said in a February 15th Denver Post article, quote, "We're working around the clock to get this one solved as soon as we can. We don't want the rest of the world to think this is such a horrible place," end quote. Kelly Grizzell said that she thought it would be solved quickly, but that wouldn't be the case. As with most cases starting at square one, police were looking for two main pieces of information: who committed this crime and why. To seek those answers, they began with interviewing anybody who interacted with the couple that night and also the woman who found them. The coworker who discovered the crime scene reiterated her story that she happened to be driving by and noticed the lights on. Police wanted to know more about the person she saw exiting the back of the shop, and she worked with composite sketch artists. I'll post these on Instagram, but here's the description. A white male, age 16 to 20 years old, 5'7" to 5'8", 150 to 170 pounds, clean-shaven with blondish hair. He was wearing blue flared leg jeans, tennis shoes, a black baseball cap, and a black coat with red lining or a red shirt. The woman did note that she didn't recognize this person. Another possible witness came forward as possibly one of the last people to see Nick alive. His name is Nathan Grill, and he was also 15 years old at the time of the crime. He shared that the store and the areas around it were popular for kids to hang out, particularly local skateboarders. Nathan actually worked at the Subway store for 8 months and had quit just a month prior to the murders. He was good friends with Nick and decided to visit him at the store that night with a few friends. He said they were there from around 8:30 p.m. to 9:55 p.m. in the evening of February 13th. He described it as a slow night for business, but as they were leaving at 9:55 p.m., Nick was serving a rare late-night customer. I couldn't find any source material that gave a description of this final customer before closing, not even if they were male or female. Perhaps that is something that police want to keep quiet, or that they have ruled out of any significance, though the latter I feel is unlikely. Nathan shared that Stephanie had not arrived yet at the time that he left. Nathan and others who worked at Subway were able to provide crucial information to law enforcement about what closing up the store would entail. The store officially closed at 10 p.m. Nathan did say it was not uncommon for friends to come visit whomever was closing. But in terms of official procedures, the doors would be locked right up at 10 p.m. Employees needed to clean up and turn the lights out, which usually could be completed in less than a half an hour. Throughout the shift, about once every hour, employees would feed any large bills they had in the register into a safe that only managers had access to. The scene was incredibly challenging to process. There were fingerprints everywhere. After all, it's a restaurant. There were video cameras in store, but employees shared that they were barely ever on and operating. Detectives were limited in what they would share about the surveillance, but have gone as far as to say that they were unable to gather anything of significant evidence from them. It's unclear what types of video cameras there were, how many there were, what view they had, and how clear the footage was. Struggling to find any witnesses that could lead to the who, police considered motive. The first thought was possible robbery. A forensic audit was done to see if any product or money was missing from the store. The findings were that nothing was missing. The large bills were all deposited into that locked safe I mentioned earlier, so investigators pretty quickly turned away from this theory. I am not a professional, and I recognize police have access to the specifics of the case that I don't, but I'm not sure I'm sold on ruling that out based solely on the reasons stated. Until I was reading about the subway policies on large bills, I had no idea that they would be locked in a safe. So how would somebody who was coming in to rob the store know that? Nowadays, I often see fast food restaurants and other businesses have a sign on the door that states that there are no large bills on the premises or that only small bills are accepted up to a certain amount, usually $50. But those are a newer concept and weren't visibly displayed back then. How often have you heard of a robbery gone wrong? Just because there was nothing notably missing doesn't mean that the intent of the person walking in that night wasn't to rob the place. Something happened that resulted in the shooting, and the suspect panicked and ran. I also think of the eyewitness account of the person slipping out of the back door. When she arrived, the two were already dead, but if the person slipping out the back door was the murderer, they hung around until somebody showed up. Maybe it's because they were still looking for how to access the safe or the cash register and gave up when they saw the car pull in. A 2007 ABC News article highlighted just how dangerous of a job being a late-night fast food worker can be. In it, the article describes how bigger fast food corporations extended their evening hours and opened earlier to maximize profits, but that late-night hours bring an increased risk for crime to occur. In the years 2003 to 2006, there were 109 fast food worker homicides in the United States. Compared to other dangerous late-night jobs, fast food workers were killed more often than taxi cab drivers and about the same amount as convenience store workers. Another possibility is an angry former employee. There is no evidence that suggests this to be the case. It's just worth noting that sometimes workplace-related homicides are perpetrated by angry employees. Or former employees, rather. On some corners of the internet, Nathan Grill is discussed as a suspect. He admitted himself that he was wearing clothes that matched the description of the person leaving the back door. However, he said that he knows he is innocent, so he isn't worried about the clothing coincidence. He was a former employee and one of the last people to see Nick alive. If you recall, though, the woman who saw the suspect leave out the back door said that she didn't recognize the person, but saw enough of him to create the composite sketch. Being that Nathan had worked there just a month prior, this woman would have likely recognized him. He also had quit Subway by his own choice versus a termination. Police have never mentioned him or any other former employees as suspects, and I personally believe this is an unlikely scenario. So that brings me to the third and most popular theory: drugs. When you search for information on this case, the most common theory to arise is that this is drug-related. Nathan Grill went on record saying that some employees smoked marijuana, but that there wasn't a high level of drug activity at the store. But investigators did launch an investigation in the area and revealed that the restaurant and several other area businesses were involved in a drug ring and that the Littleton area was not immune from drug problems. Colorado led the way in legalizing marijuana in 2012, but back in 2000, it was still illegal. Rumors circulated that the storefront was used after hours to distribute both marijuana and cocaine. Hart-Grizzell filed a lawsuit against the owner of the Subway. The lawsuit was thrown out, but she alleged that the owners knew about the drug activity, that it was known that non-employees would be let in the back door to distribute drugs after hours, and that the cameras were routinely and intentionally left off to not capture the activity. She also reiterated that Nick was too young to close the store alone. All of the suspected drug activity in the area did lead to a probe by the DEA, with a wiretap on more than 3,000 phone calls. Together, the information compiled led to 35 arrests related to mostly cocaine distribution in the area of the Subway restaurant. In all of that investigation, though, there wasn't a single piece of information that shed any light on the double homicide. Think of that. That is hours of phone calls, and not once was there anything that even yielded a clue. In fact, in the 50 subsequent drug investigations, nothing was revealed about the homicides there either. So while this tends to be the leading theory for investigators and in public opinion, there has been nothing to advance the case or to prove that this was the motive or who was behind it. If it was about drugs, the question still remains, why Nick and Stephanie? Were they in the wrong place at the wrong time? Nick had only worked there a month. Was he directly involved in this drug scheme or just aware of the drug sales on the peripheral? At this point, nobody has those answers, so we're just left with questions. Just under 2 years after the Subway murders, on January 27, 2002, 3 employees at an AMF bowling alley were murdered while closing up for the night. Located at 5485 South Broadway in Littleton, it's 5 miles northeast of the West Coal Mine Avenue subway. 29-year-old James Springer and 26-year-old Aaron Gola were finishing their shifts at the bowling alley. A third person, 23-year-old Bobby Zajac, worked at a nearby bowling alley and was waiting around for a ride home from James. There is a tight timeline of the events for this crime. At 11:40 p.m., Aaron called a friend for a ride home. When that friend showed up at 11:55 p.m., she discovered all 3 of them shot to death. A young, white, bald male with a medium build, wearing a long, dark-colored trench coat, was seen exiting the bowling alley and leaving in a dark-colored, late-model pickup truck. This bowling alley had been the location of another attempted burglary on January 20th, 2002, just a week prior, and the deaths were thought to be possibly related to that. There has never been any link to these 2 cases, but there are a few similarities worth mentioning. Both shootings occurred after hours while employees were closing up for the night. Both included somebody who worked there at the location and a bystander. Both have young, white, male suspects that were witnessed leaving the premises when someone showed up, unaware of what they were about to walk into. and both crimes are unsolved to this day. Police continue to be baffled by this case, and they are still looking for answers, alongside the loved ones of Nick and Stephanie. Nick's father and stepmother moved to a new town near Grand Junction in the aftermath of the tragedy. His mom left the state altogether and passed away in 2012 at just 49 years old. Police have interviewed countless people and have an array of evidence stored up. They have DNA evidence that they have sent away to labs internationally, but they haven't connected it to a person. The last article I can find that describes the DNA testing was 2017, and there have been significant DNA advancements since then. So I'm hoping that creates new opportunity for investigators to exhaust new options. What DNA has been found or where it was found, that has not been released. In fact, it's evident that they have a bunch of information they haven't released. But there's a good reason for that. See, possibly to gain attention related to the infamy of the Columbine tragedy, there have been several people who have falsely confessed to this crime specifically. Detectives are able to determine this because they ask information that only the killer or killers would know. Failing to get this information correct, police know that they don't have their suspect. A 2017 article from news outlet Denver 7 shows a photo of investigators Elias Alberti and Sergeant Wayne Halverson hovering over the 40 full binders that make up their investigation. Said Alberti, quote, "This case has been submitted to DNA and the lab multiple different times to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. We've done fingerprints, all the standard stuff that we do investigating a crime, and we've got nothing off of those." Halverson added, quote, "We've spoken to friends, family, and customers from that day, and just no one knows anything or has come forward yet to say anything. I think that's the frustrating thing, is that you can see in front of you the amount of work that's been done on it, and yet it seems like you keep coming back to a dead end," end quote. Stephanie and Nick were buried together at Mount Lindo Cemetery. Next to where they are buried is a bench inscribed with their names and a quote that says, "Together in peace forever." Each year, their friends and families get together on Valentine's Day to toss frisbees off the side of the mountain, leaving flowers and joining each other in solidarity and remembrance. Nick and Stephanie had their whole lives ahead of them. They would be entering their early 40s if they were still alive, but instead their chance at a future was violently and senselessly taken from them. Police are still very hopeful that resolution is possible in this case. In the 2017 9 News article, Alberti shared, quote, "2 teenagers in a subway down in Littleton, Colorado in 2000 do not get murdered and nobody has any knowledge or information about it," end quote. I agree. If the person who was seen leaving out the back that night is the perpetrator of the crime, he'd likely be around 40 years old today. 24 years have passed since the double homicide at the time of this recording, and that is a long time to have that on your conscience. If you are someone who knows something about this case, it's not too late to come forward. There is a hefty reward. Metro Denver Crime Stoppers have a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to the arrest or arrests of the individuals involved. The franchise LLC associated with the Subway store, which closed shortly after the murders, has also put up a $10,000 reward. If you have any information, please reach out to the Metro Denver Crime Stoppers. Call Metro Denver Crime Stoppers at 720-913-7867 or 720-913-STOP. Submit a tip online to metrodenvercrimestoppers.com. This has been A Simpler Time True Crime. If you like this episode, Please subscribe and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts, and tell your friends. All sources are shared in the show notes. For pictures referenced in the episode and the latest news about the podcast, follow the podcast Instagram page @SimplerTimeCrimePod.